If you're thinking about buying your first home or an investment property, then this is the video for you. In today's video, I'm going to condense my lessons and the 10 things that I've learned from buying more than 1,000 properties for myself and my clients over the last 12 years. Super excited. I wish I had have got to watch this before I bought my first place. Hopefully I can save you some of the dumbass mistakes that I've made and you can get a much better outcome off the back of this. Get your pen, get your paper. This is definitely one you want to take some notes on. Buying your first investment property or your first home can be extremely scary. I remember taking 9 months to buy my first unit down there in Sydney back in 2011. And I completely shit myself. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have the right team of advisors. I was completely paralyzed by the analysis that I was doing at the time. I didn't have a mentor or a coach, and I was feeling extremely alone at 24 years of age, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. Now, hopefully in this video, we can show you a simple 10-step process for going from where you are today, whether that's extreme confidence and ready to go, or just thinking about this over the next few years and wanting to prepare for that step forward. Now, the first thing that I did that made focusing on property much easier for me personally was deciding that I wanted to be a property investor. And that meant, not looking at shares at that particular time in my life, not looking at crypto, not looking at short-term cash flow things. I went all in on property. Now, the reason I decided property was because I've always loved it. I like that I can feel it. I like that 80% or 70% of the market in Australia is mums and dads that use it for a place to raise their families as opposed to speculating on it and hoping to make money out of it. But realistically, the reason I went why property is when I looked at the data from CoreLogic. Now, over the last 30 years, houses in Australia's capital cities have gone up by 453%, which means they've averaged around about 15% per annum, which is absolutely ridiculous. I went on to look at the data over the last 50 years, and houses in Australia or property in Australia over the last 50 years has gone up in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane by more than 9.5% per annum. Now, I also read a book when I was just getting started by John Lindemann called Mastering the Australian Housing Market. And in that book, he looked at 100 years of history in Australia and found that houses had gone up by 11% on average per annum over that period of time. Now, why this is important to you and I is super simple. If you were to go buy a home or an investment today for $500K, and that property grows by 4.8% a year for the next 15 years, your $500K property today is now worth $1 million. What if you went out and spent $1 million on a property today, and that $1 million property went up by the same 4.8% a year for the next 15 years? You're going to be sitting on a property that's worth $2 million. This is why I love property, because I can put down a 5, 10, 20% cash deposit or deposit using equity, and I can use that leverage to make money that I could never save in my day job, or I could never earn through bonuses or increasing my income in my day job. And that is what excites me. So the first step is to really go, the reason I'm going for property is because it's been secure, it has had a very strong long-term history of performance, and it's worked to create wealth for literally tens of thousands of Australians over the last 100 years in Australia. Now, the second step after deciding that you are going to become a property investor or a property buyer is really figuring out your budget. Now, there's a few different questions you can ask there. It is, how much can I spend? And the simplest way to figure that out is to go talk to a bank manager or go talk to a mortgage broker, and they'll look at your income, they'll look at your expenses, and they'll look at savings, and they'll give you one of two answers. Yes, you can go and buy a property at the moment and this is how much you can borrow, or no. Now, I've got more no's in my journey over the last 12 years as an investor than most people would get in a lifetime. In fact, in the last 12 years, I've only been able to buy for about 3, maybe 4 years of that 12-year period. The rest of the time I've been waiting for equity to go up, or I've been saving money, or I've been paying down debt or increasing the rent returns. So if you get a no, don't take it personally. Ask your broker or bank manager one simple question, which is, well, what can I do to increase that amount of money so that I can get into the market and buy my home or buy that investment property? The next question after asking how much can you spend is how much do you want to spend? Now, there's generally two types of people out there. I've always been on the first end, which is I want to spend more than I can borrow. And so I'm always having to make a compromise on how much I can spend on the next property that I buy. But there are a number of you guys out there that are earning great money at the moment or have great combined incomes that can actually borrow far more than you want to spend. So your broker or bank manager may say to you, hey, you can borrow 500K and that's your budget. But for some of you out there, you might be able to borrow $1 or $2 million. And for those of you, you might feel really uncomfortable spending that amount of money, or you may not need to spend anywhere near that amount to get a great property. So you need to figure out how much you can spend and then make that next decision. If you can borrow the money, then am I in a position to go buy at the moment? And that moves you to the next step, which is getting that pre-approval in place with your bank manager or your mortgage broker. Now, once we know how much we can spend and we've got the pre-approval in place, the third step in the process is identifying the type of property that you want to invest in. Now, for me personally, I just look at history and I use history to make the best decision possible moving forward into the future. One of my favorite economists and analysts is a guy by the name of Phil Anderson. When I look at that longer term history and then I go, well, what type of asset do I really want? Now, you can look at houses, you can look at townhouses, you can look at units. When I looked at houses, for example, in Australia's capital cities in the last 30 years using CoreLogic's data, I found that houses did 147% better in the metro markets than units did, and they did 100% better in the regional units than units did. Fuck. Houses did 100% better in the regional markets than units did. That was a mouthful to get through. So for me, I always look at houses, and if you can afford to, you should do the same thing. And then I went, well, we've got these 8 metro markets and we've got these 3 incredible cities on the east coast of Australia. We've got hundreds of different regional markets around Australia with literally thousands of different suburbs. So again, I went back to CoreLogic and went, well, how have the metro markets done relative to the regional? And I found again over the last 30 years that the metro markets being Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, etc., had done 140% better than Australia's regional markets. So again, I went yes to houses because of the data, and I went yes to metro markets over regional. Now, I have no problems at all buying the major regional markets surrounding the metro. For example, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast in Queensland, Wollongong, Newcastle in Sydney, or even Geelong and the Mornington Peninsula around Melbourne. Those markets have done extremely well because there is such a big lifestyle benefit, and they are quite diversified, quality local economies now in those areas that do connect to the capitals as well. But if you can afford to, I would say that they should be the markets you should be focusing on, mainly because of the data that we're talking about here. Now, the fourth step on your journey to buying your own home or investment property is deciding, are you going to make this decision on your own, and are you going to go out there and buy it on your own? And if you are, then I absolutely recommend listening to some videos on YouTube, listening to some podcasts, maybe reading a couple of books, and maybe trying to have a couple of coffees with somebody or some people in your network that you know. Maybe it's your mum, your dad, maybe it's brothers and sisters, maybe it's colleagues at work, maybe it's friends, and literally just go sit down and, ask one simple question, which is, you've obviously bought a property or a number of properties. If you're in my position now, what would you be doing? What would you be looking at? What mistakes did you make that I can learn from and, not have to go through that journey the hard way like people like myself have? Now, everybody that has bought property is so happy to share their experience with you, and everybody, you'll recognize the more conversations you have will have a completely different decision. Now, when I'm listening to somebody, for me these days, if they're an investor, I want them to be 100% financially free through their properties, whether that's through the equity that they've accumulated or the cash flow over time. And I want them to have many years of runs on the board and have gone through multiple cycles of low interest rates, high interest rates, really beautiful markets like we're in at the moment, even though the media is telling you that we're not, and really bad markets like the GFCs that we've been in before as well. Or there's the other option, which is potentially partnering with someone like myself or one of the other buyer's agents in Australia that really knows the market that you want to invest in, that can sit with you and look at where you are today, look at where you want to be longer term, educate you on the market, help you identify the right part of the market, the right suburb, the right street, the right property, introduce you to an incredible team of advisors, make sure you do the right due diligence and just safely hold your hand all the way through that journey. Now, 50% of the people that we speak to each week take some of the ideas and go and smash it on their own. And a small number of people that we choose to work with, that choose to work with us, come on the journey over a couple of months to safely and securely buy that next investment. Now, the fifth step is deciding where to buy. And I think this is what catches out a lot of first-time investors, because if you think about all of the metro markets, all the regional markets in Australia, and all the suburbs within those markets, it can become extremely scary and overwhelming to think about which market. And I remember when I was starting out as an investor, I was just, absolutely overwhelmed by the number of options. I didn't know that houses had done better. I didn't know that metro and major regional markets had done better. I didn't know that I should buy quiet streets with bigger blocks of land with nicer homes on them. And I'll get to more of that in a minute. So in terms of where to buy, for me, it becomes really, really simple. I'm an East Coast buyer because according to the Australian Bureau of Stats, 75% of Australia's population, job and infrastructure growth in the next 25 years in Australia is going to be concentrated between the sunny coast and Geelong, effectively, along the east coast of Australia. Now, when I look at the bigger picture and the longer term cycles, I know that many suburbs in Sydney, Melbourne, Wollongong, Newcastle, Geelong and the Mornington Peninsula have already gone up by 100% in the last 10 years. Now, when I look at the longer term data from the likes of Jeremy Shepherd, when he looked at Sydney over 25 years, he found that places that had gone up really quickly in the first 10 years of a 20-year cycle often did less in the second 10 years, and places that had done less in the first 10 years did better in the second 10 years. Now, this could be two suburbs in the same city. For example, the northern beaches of Sydney has gone ballistic in the last 10 years, but some of the suburbs in Western Sydney haven't done as well. So statistically speaking, longer term, those suburbs that have done less in the next 10 years might do a little bit better. But then I go, well, I'm not just going to look at Sydney, I'm also going to look at Melbourne and I'm going to look at Brisbane. And when I look at Brisbane at the moment, there's suburbs that have gone up ridiculously quickly in the last 5 to 10 years, but then there's suburbs just next to them that in the same period of time have only done 2.5% to 5%, which means they are statistically undervalued, and as we run up to the Olympic Games, have massive potential. So when you're thinking about where to buy, if you can think bigger picture than I did when I was starting out versus just buying what you knew close to home and hoping that that's going to work out, then, an example might be to go, well, Brisbane's the most undervalued capital city in the east coast of Australia. Then within Brisbane, there's these different pockets, the same as Sydney and Melbourne. Right now, the undervalued pockets of Brisbane are parts of the north, parts of the south, parts of the southeast, parts of the southwest. And then within that, going, okay, I'm going to focus, for example, on north side of Brisbane. I'm going to look at suburbs that haven't gone crazy, so suburbs further than 20 k's in the city. I'm going to look at maybe a suburb called Kalanga, for example, that has done pretty well. It's grown by about 5 or 6% per annum over the last 10 years, but in the last 50 years has gone up by more than 9% per annum. It looks pretty good statistically speaking. It's just had a train station upgrade. It's just got the brand new university opening up near it. It's got plenty of sales each year, which means that there's going to be plenty of properties for me to look at. It's connected to the sunny coast. It's just up the road from the Brisbane for the CBD for work. And then once I get to that suburb of Kalanga, I go, well, I know now, I want to focus on what to buy, which is my next step in my journey. So it's like, I want Kalanga, I want a house, I want a piece of land at least 500 square meters. I want it to be in a quiet street, not on a busy road. I don't want it to be on a cemetery. I don't want it to be backing onto a school or a university or shops or a shopping center. I want it to be in a nice street where when I drive down, I can see that the majority of the lawns have been mowed, the majority of the houses don't have 3 or 4 cars on the front lawn, and that people are generally taking care of the place. And it's really just thinking, is this the sort of place that if I was in the financial position of the people living in the area, would I want to live there longer term? Like, could I see myself raising my kids in this home? Could I see myself raising my kids on this street? Now, when looking at, what to buy on top of the land size and having a nice home in a nice quiet street, you do want to be looking at suburbs a little bit statistically as well. So I want to be looking at, do they have good household incomes? Do they have a good number of people that own there and a slightly smaller number of people that rent there? What's happening in the area in terms of schools? What's happening in the area in terms of the demographics, in terms of the ages? Is there some infrastructure there, or is there some infrastructure coming? And, all of that stuff is completely free. All you have to do, once you've reduced it down to 1 or 2 suburbs that you're focusing on, wherever in Australia you decide to buy, then really just putting in that suburb, for example, Kalanga plus, percentage of renters, Kalanga plus average household income, Kalanga plus vacancy rates, and you really want to be finding a suburb with a vacancy rate below 2%. And all of these things are things that you can slowly learn over time as you learn and follow more and more of the content, whether it's on our channel or other channels out there that you vibe with, so that you can make a great first purchase for your own home or a great first investment choice, and not end up in a position like I did where you didn't look at any of this stuff properly. You didn't see a video like this, so you sort of went out there and winged it and hoped it worked out. And, often it does, but often it doesn't as well when you approach it that way. The 6th step is obviously, starting to look for the property, which is the most exciting part / the scariest part of the journey, I suppose, and to actually get to that place where you place an offer. Now, right now, as of 2022, the market obviously out there has a fair bit of fear in it, like it did back in 2020, 2018, and 2010 and 11 in Australia as well. What I've noticed is that about once every 12 months, people freak out for a certain period of time, and once every sort of 2 to 4 years in Australia, we get a major freak out like we're going through at the moment. Now, for some people, that means just sitting, waiting, seeing what happens. For people like myself, it represents an incredible buying opportunity to look at houses and to make offers while there's not as many people out there doing that. For you as an investor, you really just have to decide, or as a homeowner, what makes sense for you. Can you afford to buy at the moment? If you can, then should you buy at the moment? And, for some people, it might be too scary to think about doing it at the moment. For other people like myself and our clients who love buying below market value and grabbing an opportunity, then when these little holes in the market come up, it can be a great time to look. But placing an offer is, a very, very important part of the process. I highly recommend talking to somebody in the state that you're buying in, that has bought a property before, to walk you through the process of exactly what happens. I think it's also very, very important to make a relationship with a solicitor before you place an offer and go, look, I haven't done this before. What does a contract look like, and what clauses should I be adding to the contract? And then there's the whole negotiation side of the property with the agent. Now, in a soft market like this, you normally have a little bit of extra time, maybe a few days or a week to negotiate back and forth. What I recommend is figuring out what market value for the property is by talking to a couple of agents, talking to the agent and looking at the sold section of realestate.com. Then once you've figured out what you think the property is roughly worth, starting a little bit below that, getting some feedback from the agent, just being super open and honest. Like, they sell for a living. Your job is to figure out how you can get the property for the cheapest possible price in the safest possible terms for yourself. Go back and forth, get that feedback from the agent, and then come to a place where they're happy, the seller's happy, and you're happy as well. Then we move on to an equally important part of the process, which 99.9% of first-time home buyers or investors miss, myself included, and that is due diligence. Now, to do good due diligence, you really want to have all of the terms in the contract that are going to protect you to make some decisions after you've actually placed the offer and had that offer accepted. For me personally, I want a building and pest inspection clause in the contract. I want a due diligence clause in the contract. I want a finance clause in the contract. I want a flood search or a bushfire search clause in the contract. I want a final building certificate search clause in the contract as well. Now, in my first property purchase, I think I had a finance clause and that was it. And then obviously, depending on the state in Australia, most states, the real estate institutes who give the contracts give you a small cooling off period as well. But the reason part 7 is doing due diligence is to protect yourself. What you're trying to figure out is, has the solicitor found any issues with the title? Has the solicitor found any issues with the final building certificate? When you get the building and pest inspector out there, have they found any termite issues or any structural issues or any major maintenance issues which could become a major headache for you in the future or put your property at risk? When it comes to finance, you want to give your mortgage broker or your bank manager ample time, especially because those guys sacked so many people during COVID that they're busier at the moment. There's less staff doing more work, and therefore it can take a little bit longer to get that tick of approval. So you want to give yourself time. You want to go through the property, obviously, or you want your buyer's agent to go through the property to make sure that it looks good. And you want to take photos and videos and have a look at them in your own time at home. You want, if you're getting the property as an investment, your property manager most likely to go through the property as well. And, all of these things that you do as part of due diligence after you've bought the property, but before you legally have to settle on the property or are liable to buy the property, is to cover your own ass. And that is things that so many first-time buyers and investors miss, but it's absolutely vital. And I think a simple step here without overcomplicating it is, if you're doing it on your own, just go talk to your solicitor and make sure that your contract protects you, and then get a whole bunch of people through the property to protect your ass and to see the things that you're not trained to see as well. The 8th step, if you're investing versus buying on your own, is obviously renting the property out. Now, if you're working with a buyer's agent, they should be able to give you an introduction to an absolutely high quality, world-class property manager. If you're doing it on your own, then my advice as someone who tried to figure out management myself is definitely don't look after it yourself. Firstly, you're not legally covered to do it properly. You don't know what you don't know. And to save a few bucks, it is absolutely not worth it. I would highly recommend going out there, talking to 2 or 3 managers in the local area and getting a bit of a sense about how much they charge, how often they look at the property, what they do to protect your asset and how long they've been in the industry, as well as, more than anything else, how much they care. If they're passionate about property and property management, which it's hard to find someone that is, as a property manager that's been in the game for a long time, then, that can be the person, and give them a 6-month, 12-month trial and then decide if they're not working out for you, if there's somebody better in the market. But give them that time, because it's often quite bumpy when you first buy a property, whether it's to move in for yourself or to invest. I can almost guarantee in the first year there'll be almost $5,000 worth of expenses, whether it's a hot water heater blowing, air conditioner, dishwashers, stoves, some electrical related stuff, some plumbing related stuff, carpets, painting, landscaping, like just maintenance related stuff generally comes up in that first year when you buy. The 9th step is definitely not something that I can talk about, but is the tax side of owning a property. Just go talk to your accountant, talk to a tax depreciation specialist about, I've bought this property, this is what it cost me, here's where all of the costs associated with it, now what should I do? those guys can definitely point you in the right direction. You might want to ask an investor that you know, or a business person that you know, or somebody that you know that has bought a number of properties, who they use for their accounting and for their tax depreciations, to get a referral. And again, same as your mortgage broker, same as your solicitor, same as your property manager, same as your buyer's agent, talk to a few of them and figure out who sounds the best for you, who has the runs on the board, who has and shares the same value or vision for the future as you do as well. And then the 10 and the final step is just the general housekeeping that goes along with either owning your own home or an investment property. For me, I just set up a simple spreadsheet which tracks any income from the property or the expenses from the property. I've got a folder online where I put all of the receipts into, and that's just good practice. And then once a year, just before the end of the tax year, the financial year, I go and sit with the accountant. They tell me what their plan is for my position. And then obviously after the financial year, I lodge my returns, pay the government all of the tax that I owe, and just make sure that everything's absolutely black and white and clean so that I'm in the safest position as an investor longer term. But buying your first investment or your own home is so exciting. It was by far like the best feeling that I've gone through financially in my life. It felt like I was moving towards the person that I wanted to be. It enabled me and has completely changed my life for the better now to have choices that I could never have imagined 12 years ago. The choice to spend more time with my family, to spend more time with my friends, to train more, to look after myself better, to do work like this. Like property is my passion. Helping people figure out property and financial freedom for themselves is my absolute passion. Getting to share the lessons that I've learned so that you don't fuck it up and make the same mistakes that I've made in the past is my absolute passion as well. But regardless of if you're going to do this on your own or going to work with someone like myself, I absolutely wish you all the best on the journey. If this is the first time checking out some of our stuff, please give the video a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you've been following our stuff for a while, welcome back. Thank you so much. Each week, as you know, we publish a whole bunch of stuff on YouTube and our podcast, which is the Pumped on Property Show, available on Spotify as well as iTunes. Either way, I wish you all the best on your journey to financial freedom and as a property buyer and an investor moving forward. There is so much incredible history out there that we can learn from and we can make better decisions from. And I'm just so excited to be a part of this journey with you. I wish you all the best, guys. Cheers.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Getting cool, bro. Yeah.
Oh, sweaty. So sweaty. Oh, that's good. Look at that.
Very nice, eh?
Oh.